Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, everyone, for those of us joining from all around the world. This is the webinar on publishing your research in the Journal of Learning Sciences. I'm Susan Yoon, and I'm a co-editor-in-chief of JLS. And Jan van Elst is here as well. He is also the other co-editor-in-chief. And we are going to talk very briefly at the beginning about the process that happens once you submit your paper. There was a question or two from you about how long it will take to get it through to shepherd it through to publication. We will have those discussions as well. And I'm going to let you know about some of the reasons why papers do not make it through to publication. And then after that, we will open it up for your very important questions. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing, and I'm going to pass it over to Jan.
So, well, thank you for joining us. First of all, we've been wanting to do this for a while, and so we're just going to try and take you through some things that hopefully will make it easier, at least to understand how the process works, and also some other things and other questions that you may have. So, so Susan, you're just going to play forward through these, or? So the first thing, when you send an article in, it comes to the editorial assistant, which is Mi Young, and she then checks the manuscripts to make sure that it meets certain criteria, like, you know, page length and all of these kind of things. And then it comes to one of us, either Susan Yoon or myself. So then we decide, we read it through carefully, and we see whether or not it fits with the stated editorial goals that we have for the journal. And we also look at some of the things that we know about what reviewers tend to say about things, and we'll get to some of those a bit later. So if it is not a good fit, it will come back to the author with a decision to say that basically it's not a good fit. That normally takes place within about 3 weeks after sending your article in. We try to keep it within that time frame. For the most part, we've been able to do that. So if it does get past the editor-in-chief, then it goes to, most articles go to an associate editor or a strand editor if it's a strand article. So we'll focus mostly on the associate editor here. The associate editor will try to find reviewers for it. One of those reviewers will be an editorial board members, and two of the other reviewers will be ad hoc reviewers. And then the associate editor, when the reviews come in, will write a draft decision letter for the piece, which then goes back up to the editor-in-chief. Sometimes there's a little bit of go back and forth to get the final version of that out. And then it goes out back to the author. And then it can be any one of those decisions, except all the way down through reject. So if it is a, let's say, revise and resubmit, then you revise it, you get back into it. But eventually, hopefully, your article is accepted. And when that happens, then you get these last few things that we see here. So just continue with that. So there you come, and there's your article in the journal. So what you should do before submitting to an article to this journal, I would say this also applies to other journals that you might be writing for. First of all, read the journal, know what's going on in the journal. That's really important. Sometimes people are sending things in that are where that is really the last consideration instead of something that comes a bit earlier. So second, connect your arguments to the conversations that are going on in the journal. So not just citing previous work in it, but really finding some way to connect it to something that has been going on, or at least making very clear reasons why this ought to connect to things that have been going on. So maybe it's something quite new that this community should be interested in, and you need to make the case for that to some extent. Read the instructions to authors. I think they're very clear and very specific about what's required about formatting, blind submission, and all of those kind of things. Anonymize your manuscripts, and take the mission and values to heart. So, you know, don't just do it in a mechanical way, but try to understand the community that you were trying to write to. So, so we have the journal has a website that has instructions to authors and all of those kind of things. And if you haven't looked at that before, please do that, because it has a lot of the information we go back to. Actually, when we're not sure if something's going to fit, we will go back there and see what it actually says about that, just to make sure we don't send messages. So maybe we'll continue, Susan. So this is a little bit about the mission and priorities and values that we have. This is actually, all of these slides were created by the previous editors-in-chief, but they're quite good, so we continue to use them. So we look for a multidisciplinary forum for research, education, and learning. And we'll see some more things coming in as we get to the next bullets. So I won't go too much further here. So what's really important is processes of learning. Okay, so we want to understand how learning happens, particularly how learning happens in a designed or a natural environment, right? That can be a classroom, it can be all kinds of other things. But we're looking at how learning happens, not just the outcomes of the learning. So successful submissions to position their arguments with extended literature in the learning sciences, not just this journal, I would say, but more broadly in the field as well. So there are some other journals where work is also published in this field. You need to be aware of that literature. So they should reflect the core practices and values that have defined the learning sciences as a field. So you see those things here. We're always, of course, thinking about broadening the field. You know, it's not like this is written in stone, but this is pretty much captures what we are doing now. So certainly privileging design is very important. Interdisciplinary, grounding research in real world context. So a lot of the studies are done in classrooms or in other situations where learning normally happens, or that are designed for learning to be happening in. So I won't read through all of this, but these are the kinds of things that we look for. So a lot of the studies have a technological component to them, but not all of them. It's not necessarily for them to have that. It just where it's where things have been going in the last few years. Strong connection between research and practice is also important. So I think we'll just keep going. So kinds of submissions. So this is really quite important. We give 15,000 words for a full journal article that includes the reference list as well as any text in tables. We think that's a lot of space. We give a lot of space because we want people to, to use that when they have a lot to say. So it's not a place just to write in a kind of a verbose way, but it's when you have done quite a lot of research on a question that you want to share and that requires that amount of space. So that's one format that we have. So we ask for submissions to be within that frame, up to about 15,000 words. We have another, we also have special issues from time to time. We'll make an invitation for proposals for that soon, again, for the next one. And there's a proposal that needs to be submitted for that, and that will be reviewed as well. So, and then we have reports and reflections. These are brief articles. They're really articles meant to shake up the field a little bit, discuss some problem that the field has been facing, some question the field has not been thinking about, in those kind of things. The idea is this is not the place so much for an empirical study, because in 6,000 words for us, you don't have enough time to really do that well, but more just to generate the debate. So you can see some of the sub-ideas here, for example, propose bold new ideas, broach controversial topics, and so forth. So we'd like to see more of those kind of articles. I think that they're not known as much as the longer articles, but we are very interested in those kind of articles as well. Communicating with the journal. So you have a cover letter. Of course, it should be stated that IRB approval has been obtained and all of these kind of things, not submitted anywhere else. That's kind of standard. Why it's a good match for the journal. If you have, it's useful to indicate a couple of reviewers. So if you have a person or two that you think will be really good for us, let us know about that person. There's a space to do that when you do your online submission. If you have an academic kind of debate where the person is on the other side of that debate than you are, and you would prefer not for that person to be reviewing it, you can also indicate that. The associate editor will look at that and will make use of that if they agree with. So I recommend you put something there rather than not put something there. Then the revision, actually the revision happens in an anonymous document that is uploaded when you submit your revision. So in that statement, you need to address these things that you see here. So basically, explain what you did do and what you did not do to revise the paper, and respond to other points that you did not incorporate into the revision. And once in a while, we get a letter like this that is almost longer than the paper itself. So people go into a lot of arguments. Probably that needs to be more effectively in the paper itself. So try to keep this statement quite succinct, because people are not going to read through a document that is 15 pages long at that point. So I think that's about it for this part. So I think Susan will take over with the second part.
Yes.
Thanks.
Let's just take a moment and pause here before I move into the next section, which is about why papers don't make it through to publication, to see if there are any questions that you'd like to put in the chat. And while we're waiting for those, we did have one question from one participant. And the question was something like, what is the time to first decision? And first decision, I'll just let you know that there are multiple rounds of revisions that a published article goes through, sometimes up to 4 rounds or 5 rounds. And so, but we do have some metrics on time to decision, first decision, and Jan and I have been working very hard. It was part of our mandate for our editorialship to shorten the amount of time to first review. And so Jan, could you just say a few words about how many days it's taking now? Because it keeps getting shorter, I think.
Okay, so we put this on the website a few months ago. So last year, for a first decision that was not immediate rejection, the average was about 100 days. So some of them, so that's about 3 months. Some of them are, quite a few of them are shorter than that, actually, after about 2 months. There are also, of course, some that take longer. Sometimes, a reviewer can be late by as much as a month or even more, and it might take. We still have some examples where it takes 6 months or even a bit more. We try to eliminate those as much as we can, but on average, you should expect a decision back after about 3 months. So if you haven't heard by that time, it's perfectly fine to just send a message to the journal and ask if a decision is coming soon, if you're worried about it. But if 3 months haven't passed yet, I would say then it's probably just in process. We don't normally say anything. So if you haven't heard anything back after about a month, it's probably a pretty safe assumption to think that it is going to that it has gone to an associate editor, and associate editors then trying to find reviewers for it. So, so that's a lot better than we had before. So the 100 days that I mentioned, immediately before we started, that was around 170 days, and it's been higher than in that range for a few years. So we're happy to bring it down. We know it's very important to authors to have this as quick as possible.
Great.
So that's
okay. So we have a few questions, and I will, before we move on, there were just a couple of things I wanted to note. The first is when we talk about the word limit, the word limit is 15,000 words, and that is inclusive of references and words and tables. We are among the journals with the highest word limit. If you've done your homework, you've gone out to see, most journals are trending toward shorter word limits, like upwards around 10,000 words. Because we are a interdisciplinary, we do we do mixed methods research very well. We do want to honor that and keep it a little bit higher, but that word limit, we try very hard not to go above that word limit. So just keep that in mind, please. Anna has a question. What is the communication among the editorial team and the authors generally like? So the associate editor is the one who is going to be the point person for the paper that has been assigned to that associate editor. And there is a good deal of communication that happens between the associate editor and the author when it is on the publication track. So let me just talk about the publication track. And that is a kind of way to understand whether it's going to eventually make it to publication. So we are a very mentorly journal. We provide a lot of feedback, even in the rejects on receipt. That's a category of when it doesn't make it past the editor-in-chief, Jan or myself. Even with the rejects on receipt, we try to give as many or the most pertinent details about why it wasn't a good fit for the journal. When it is, and when you get, when it has been sent out to the associate editor, and the associate editor has sent it to reviewers, the associate editor will collect all the reviews and summarize the big major points that have to be fixed for it to be considered in the next round. At that point, if it is a revise and resubmit, that paper will go out once it's been, once the authors have addressed the reviewers and the AE's concerns, it will go back out to, at the minimum, it will be a new reviewer and one or two new reviewers and one or two of the previous reviewers. So Anna's second question is what is the, a frequent decision? Well, from a revise and resubmit, a frequent decision of reject after a revise and resubmit. So there are multiple reasons why it might be a reject after a revise and resubmit. One is that the authors were not able to address the major concerns, usually the very big concerns that the associate editor will outline in the decision letter. Those were just not adequately addressed. Another reason might be that it has gone out, usually because we're a very mentorly journal, we want to give as much feedback and we err on the side of giving the paper a really good chance, right? If it has a chance to make it and we can work with the manuscript, then we will give a revise and resubmit, but that is not a guarantee that it will be published. So when it goes out to the reviewers who needed to see revisions and new reviewers, at that point, if the new reviewers are saying, because they have access to the previous manuscript and the reviews, if the new reviewers say it really just doesn't rise to the level, then at that point we think it's a good idea to not continue on the publication track, because at that point we're not guaranteed with a second round of reviews that it will be accepted, and that is just a waste of time for the author and a waste of time for the journal. So those are some reasons there. Jan, do you want to take the second question?
Okay, then I just need to see. So communication is like, sure, okay, as I'm wondering if there are reports and reflection formats or examples that have been more successful or less successful. Well, I think one measure of success is just how much people are referring to articles, any article. So I think in that regard, we do have some really good ones. I would say like Bill Sandoval's article in 2014 about conjecture mapping, for example, in design-based research is being referred to a lot. So it has kind of filled a void that was there at the time in terms of how people think about their data collection and various other issues when they are doing design research. So we see that being cited very much. And there are also some other things. So Carl Bereiter in the same year wrote an article that was a little bit more about what kind of knowledge we should be getting out of the learning sciences. So there was a response to that published a year later, and both of those articles have done fairly well. There have been some others. Dave Hammer and Lima Berland wrote an article about, so often articles are methodological of this kind, so articles about interpreting qualitative data that, so you don't necessarily see a lot in a journal in terms of debates that kind of thing. But certainly you see these papers coming back into into future work. So there are some other possibilities, and we're hoping to have some soon. But I would say, if you have an idea, like if you think, you think about writing a certain kind of argument, and you want to know if you think if it will be a promising piece for a reports and reflection, I would say just send us a brief description of it if you need to get a little bit of input like that. Even a draft of a couple of pages, we can have a look at it and give you some initial feedback on it if you're not quite sure about it. We've done that with a number of authors.
Great. So Sukman asked the question, first of all, thank you, you're welcome. So do we accept review papers? No, we don't accept review papers. We're a journal that publishes empirical work. Now, the reports and reflections, it's not strictly a review paper, like a meta-analysis or a meta-synthesis. But definitely the reports and reflections is, and again, it's 6,000 words inclusive of references. You can, review an idea that is salient in the learning sciences research, and everything that Jan just mentioned, can hold true. And that can be a kind of a review of, the field with the idea that, or a topic with the idea that you are going to say something about next steps and what we should be thinking about as learning scientists. But in terms of meta-analyses, we don't publish those. Anna, you asked the question about does JLS have a critical friend program? And I wrote back and said I don't really know what that is. So if you could just type in the chat what that description is. I will tell you about a couple of initiatives. Or I'll tell you about all of our initiatives that we've been trying to get the word out about how to get your paper published, and some things that you need to be aware of for JLS. So first, we have published a series of videos that are about reviewing for JLS. And in the reviewing for JLS videos, there's a lot of good information about what reviewers are looking for. And so that is, those videos can be located on the JLS website, the JLS page on Facebook, and they can also be located on the JLS page in the ISLS website. So you should access that web page, the JLS web page on the ISLS website, and look to see. There's a lot of resources there. We also have a program that is currently being considered as a permanent program, which is working with the associate editors of both IJCSCL and JLS, both of official journals of the learning sciences of ISLS. So we started this at CSCL 2015, where it was a pre-conference workshop, and we worked with roughly 10 participants. They got to work with an associate editor from either of the journals. They brought a manuscript, and they worked closely with the associate editor. They also learned, Mitch Nathan was the person who was running this. Mitch is an associate editor for JLS. And so Mitch, talked generally speaking about how to put together a good argument for a JLS paper. And of course, this webinar and other resources that you'll find on the JLS website on ISLS is a good place for you to go. Okay, and then a person who previously published in JLS and more closely works with junior authors to improve a paper that is promising but not quite there. No, we don't have a critical friends program, a friend program. At one point we were bandying about, and we had a volunteer from Janet Kolodner, who was the inaugural editor-in-chief, who ran this journal for 25 years and ran it admirably. She had volunteered to to structure something that might be similar to a Critical Friends program. But we just haven't. We've had a number of these initiatives that have taken some time to get up and running, and so we will take that under advisement.
Yeah.
Okay, if there are no other questions at this point, let me move on to the next part, which is, and I'm going to share my screen one more time, which is what happens. Why is it that some papers get rejected? Some manuscripts get rejected. And so I'm going to talk about 10 reasons why JLS might reject a paper. And so you may get something like this. Dear Dr. Van Elst, thank you for submitting your manuscript. We've read your paper and we are returning it to you because it's not a good match. Let me explain. So, so these are 10 reasons, and please go ahead and write questions again in the chat if you have any more. So the first is that we do not publish evaluation studies or a report of an enactment. So basically, you're evaluating a course or an intervention that happened, and you report on, for example, the number of students who participated, let's say in a MOOC. Or the number of people who did not participate. I mean, this is not going to be an interesting study for JLS readers. Literature review or book review, we don't publish those, and that is akin to also meta-analyses or meta-reviews. The notion of a gap in the literature. Now, this is something that we talk to our doctoral students about, and we say, look, you should be looking for what is the gap, but really the gap is really what is the value added. So JLS publishes pretty mature work. It can be your dissertation, but your dissertation is making the argument of the value added or should be value added of your research to the conversation that's already existing about the topic. And so here you want to make an argument rather than saying simply there are no papers that discuss this, because in fact, educational research has been around for a long, long time, and surely you can't be the first person with this idea. So you need to be finding what is the value added to the conversation that's already existing. We tend to get some manuscripts that don't examine the actual learning process, which is surprising sometimes, but that's true. So you need to be talking about what is the learning process that you are trying to examine in this particular study. And tell us in some detail about that, right? Even in the context section, when you're talking about in the methodology in your context section, talk to us about what the intervention is actually doing. It's not simply enough to say we administered the curriculum, but what is the curriculum and what portions of the curriculum are addressing the learning processes that you have outlined as your core investigatory activity. Pre-post only testing input and output effects. So there are journals who do this. They publish these test gains or intervention gains, but that we don't do that. We certainly would like to see pre-post outcomes, but in between, we need to know, well, what was going on that enabled the growth that we saw in the net effects. That's an extremely important aspect to publishing. Not engaging with current discussions in the learning sciences. Yes, I'm going to speak to that a little bit in more detail in one of the last slides, but here, it's important to be keeping abreast of the important topics that learning sciences is currently working on. Like in 1992, when Jeremy Rochelle published his paper was published on convergent conceptual change. That was in the day in 1992. That was a huge that was a very, very big paper, right? Because we were looking at collaboration at that moment, and how collaboration can be leveraged to enable learning to happen. But we've moved beyond that paper. And so think about what is the most current research that's going on. You know, you can learn about that by looking at the papers that have been published in the proceedings of CSCL and ICLS. Those can be free, those are freely available on the ISLS website. Look to see what was accepted and presented at the last ICLS conference in London. Look to see whether and who is publishing, and chase down those articles to understand what is the current discussion and whether you are contributing, your work is contributing to that discussion. And you'll be able to find that not just in the proceedings that have been published, but our journal and also our sister and brother journal. So IJCSCL, that's the International Journal of Computer Supported Collaborative Learning, Cognition and Instruction, MCA, now I'm forgetting what that is, stands for. I know it's going to come to me in a second. IJPBL, International Journal of Problem-Based Learning, AINED, Journal of Research in Science Teaching, Instructional Science, even Science Education, and some of the more topical journals that address, you know, content areas like math or English, history, that kind of thing. Yes, okay. And there's some question about methods and methodologies. And there's also rumors that go around that say that articulate a kind of lament that we don't publish quantitative papers, and we favor qualitative papers more. And that's simply not true. Now, we have, but since Jan and I have been working in this, one of our clear mandates to the journal is to actually look for studies that can speak to scale. And we have actually a strand that is looking at scale, and scale is not strictly defined by randomized controlled trials, but really we're looking for how is it that you've taken an intervention and that is pretty mature, and how have you shown that it can be scaled? And for that kind of scale, you know, we have to be looking at some quantitative methods, and we really welcome those kinds of methodologies. Mixed methodologies are the kinds that we normally publish in JLS, and all of those are great. We also do quasi-experimental designs, ethnographies, data mining. In fact, Alyssa Weiss is one of our associate editors, and she is well known in the field of learning analytics and educational data mining. We have a number of folks like Ryan Baker on our advisor, or on our editorial board, who are interested in educational data mining. So this is, again, that's can be understood as a quantitative methodology. Design-based research, discourse analysis, social network analysis, HLM, critical race theory, all of that is just fair game for a method. So JLS is open to a wide range of methods, and we're trying to find, we really try to find reviewers with strong expertise. In fact, Ming Chu, who is a expert in the more sophisticated quantitative methods, he's also an associate editor, as is Manu Kapoor. So those manuscripts will tend to be assigned to them. Again, no real preference, but you have to make sure that it is a genuine JLS argument, akin to the conversation that we just had, the discussions Jan and I just had now, and the methods and data really need to match the framing or the conceptual framework that you've outlined. Yeah. So this is the last slide, how to check that JLS is the right fit. You know, bottom line, is there already conversation that's happening in the journal about the topic? How have other published papers presented the methods that your study presents. And check your reference list to see that you have learning sciences journals listed. So this is all, an easy way to do this is to read several issues or even a volume of the last, say 20 papers. You don't have to read all 20 papers and like in detail, but certainly look at the abstracts, look at the titles, look at some of the outcomes of let's say the last few years. Like, is there something happening that in JLS and IJCSEL, for example, that you can contribute to? So I'm going to stop here, and I'm going to open it up again for questions that you might have. Mind, culture, and activity. Thank you very much.
Okay. There you go.
MCA.
So something coming there.
Oh, well, here's one question that's come in. You spoke about this already a bit. How are submissions handled that show a contribution to learning sciences but are based on theoretical perspectives outside of the scope of those listed on the JLS website? Well, I have a few comments, and then maybe Jan, you can chime in.
Yeah.
So the Journal of the Learning Sciences has a reputation and has had a reputation of being a kind of innovative journal. And it's no wonder why JLS has maintained one of the top rankings out of 250 education journals over the last 25 years. And so we're always looking for interesting ideas that will expand the conversation, right? So I always talk about, you need to have variation for evolution to happen, right? If you think of the canonical variation, transmission, selection, that's Darwinian evolution, right? You can't have evolution without variation. And so that's a really important piece. And within variation, though, you can have a kind of exogenous and an endogenous variation. Endogenous meaning there's variation within the conversation that's already happening, right? So how do you add to that? But there's a limit to endogenous variation. You can talk all you want about the differences and the variation, but at some point, you're going to be limited there to answer a question. And so you need to then go outside to get, other things that will help you move the conversation or move the question forward. And that's important. So in a manuscript like that, you want to say, look, here is what we've come to, and now we need a new way to think about this. And here's a new way to think about it. If you are interested in looking at a paper that does that well, it's Lama Jabber's paper on epistemology. So take a look at that paper. Even the conceptual mapping paper does a really good job of thinking about a different way to understand design. So that's important. Jan, do you want to respond to that?
Yeah, I would just add that, you've said it really well, but I think as a field, we definitely are trying to also broaden the field. So there's been a lot of conversations in the field recently about, well, also connecting to learning at scale, connecting to learning analytics, and all of these kind of things that have not been particularly strong in the journal yet, but we feel they are in the field and they are important. Also, I'd say professional development, teacher education, and things like that. And so all of these there can be theoretical perspectives in those that are maybe not so familiar to the readership that we have, but it would be important to introduce. But the important issue always is that you need to be aware of the community you are writing to. So what they have been talking about, what they have been writing about, and at least invite some connection to that. So otherwise it just seems something that is, number one, people might not care about. So you're writing something in this journal and people are not, they don't see anything in the paper that connects to what they've been thinking about. And number two, you also might have difficulty actually finding the people that really need to see the work that you want to publish. So in that case, maybe this is not the best journal. Maybe you should be going to a journal on teacher education or science education or something like that. So I think ultimately we want to grow. We want to make we want to make the field bigger than it is. We want to keep the innovativeness and the strengths that we have. So, but we also don't want to be closed-minded in terms of if something seems a little bit out. What we don't like to see are the things that Susan mentioned earlier on, which are just things that are not informative enough, I think, for our field. So when we're talking about just survey studies, just evaluation data, just pre and post test data with nothing in between that. Those are the kind of things that we know our readership is not, does not respond to well. So we want to see those kind of things, but other than different perspectives that have not gotten a lot of attention in this journal in the past, I think that's certainly worth trying. So I'll stop here on this. I don't know if there's any other questions that have come up.
Next question, do you accept detailed case studies on cognitive processes related to conceptual understanding, but not directly related to learning? So that question is interesting. I think of cognitive processes and conceptual understanding to be related to learning. So if the person who posed this question is thinking about learning strictly in the sense of that there was, an effect size gain of 0.6, like a medium effect, that's not how we think about learning necessarily. That is inclusive of how we think about learning, but conceptual understanding and cognitive processes certainly all go into, we've talked about motivation, we've talked about interest identity, we've talked about different problem solving methods. Now, JLS is quite interested in all those cognitive processes. And a detailed case study is, if it's representative of a larger conversation that's going on, again, going back to that, then a very detailed case study will work. Now, if it's a case study that is sort of singularly on its own, dangling out there without any support from other articles, I think it's probably not going to make it through the review process. And I want to be clear, Jan and I are both discussing and relating to you what the general process is and the outcomes after peer review. There is that first level of rejects on receipt, but these are general trends that we know about and that have been passed on to us after years and years of publication of the journal. And so it's not, what I'm trying to say is that these are not decisions that Jan and I are making individually. This is basically what's going on with our readership.
Yeah, I would add one thing to that question. So one question there is kind of the wonder why, why JLS versus, let's say, cognition and instruction, if it's a very cognitive analysis, or even cognitive science. So I think all of the things that are in the question sound like JLS kind of things to me, but the question again is like, so for example, we are very strongly interested in designing of learning environments and processes and things like that. So does it have something to say to those kind of questions, even if the study itself isn't like that? What, in other words, why would a JLS reader read this particular article in terms of what they are interested in? Are they going to see something that they can use in their design work, or at least in settling some other questions? So sometimes it is useful to kind of think about other journals that you know of and whether or not it fits better with this one or another one. So, but other than that, what's in the question sounds like it's certainly worth finding out about that. So if you have a particular proposal for an article.
So Jan, you were going to talk about this earlier, and we didn't do that just yet, but what are emergent and urgent topics that the journal would like to and need to see more of?
Okay, so that's kind of a hard question, because this is really what we're also trying to figure out. So we're trying to figure out the field. We also both serve on the board of the society, and so we are kind of privy to some, how people at that level think about various things. But I would say mostly we do want to grow the field. I think one area in which we want to grow the field is getting beyond the studies that we have. So we have done very well, I would say, academically in journal articles that get cited by other scholars, but we really want to have a bigger impact on what's actually happening in the world in education. So how come our colleagues don't pay as much attention to work in the learning sciences as they should? What about in schools and museums and other places? So research that helps us to understand how to do this work of, doing research on learning that really has a chance to make a difference in these kind of more practical situations is one area we're very interested in. We're also interested in, to some extent, so if you were thinking about like a reports and reflections piece, for example, this whole idea of how, cognitive neuroscience fits with other kind of levels of thinking about learning, are, something that opens the conversation up in that area is something that we feel we need to have at some point, because there are these kind of, there's lots of emphasis on neuroscience these days, and people are wondering how what we do fits with that. So so that's another example. We'd like to. So I
So,
don't know.
yeah, I'll say a few other areas. So Jan was talking about practice. Our new strand, which is really about scale, has been conceptualized in terms of policy and practice. So there was some practice in what Jan was saying, and also a tangential nod to the notion of policy. So, getting to policy. So we're very good at doing design research and looking at different kinds of learning strategies and things like that. Now, how do we package all that to make a difference in policies that are being enacted for education in the world? That's one area. Another area that we are very interested in is looking at, and I will say that these are the like the race factors, like the kinds of conversations that might be going on in MCA, but we're thinking about critical theory, critical race theory. We would like to see articles that are on interventions that include that in a conceptual framework, and that is important, I think. Something that we would like to see more of. Another area that we would like to see more of is just research on teaching. There are journals that are dedicated to that, for sure. But teaching and teacher learning and how that connects then to implementation and interventions and fundamentally student learning outcomes, right? Student learning and participation outcomes. So, how does a teacher factor into this whole equation? And that's critical. We do have quite a few interventions that are led by the researcher. But, how do we move now into, again, this is related to practice, how do we move all of those interventions into the field when we're working with teachers, and what are the affordances and constraints of working with teachers in the field? So those are some topics I think we would like to see more of. Okay, any other questions?
Seen as well, so while we're waiting, I'll just mention we've started kind of a web page on JLS on the ISLS website. So if you go to to that website, you'll see a tab there for communities, and then the journal page is there, and it has all kinds of information about news about the journal and things we're looking for and for reviewing and all of those things. So
could you put the web, would you be able to copy the URL and put it in the chat?
I'm going to, yeah.
Yeah, okay, that'd be great. And while Jan is talking about or doing that, I will say one more thing, which adds to the kind of the campaign that we're on, social media campaign, but just the campaign to support just more manuscripts being submitted and more manuscripts being accepted. And that is, we have in every issue, right? So we have a volume, which is representative of the year's worth of JLS papers. And within a volume, we have 4 issues. We're moving to 5 issues, which is why we'd like more manuscripts. But within a volume, we have 4 issues currently. Within each issue, 1 paper is slated to be on the docket for a webinar. And so you may have seen these advertised. And it is, I've attended a couple. They are rich, rich, rich with great information. The author is talking about his paper in relation to panelists that the author has chosen to respond to the paper. And there, then, you get to see what is the conversation really in detail that is going on about that topic. And so I encourage you, when those webinars come out, it's a good way to spend an hour of your day, looking at what people are talking about. Yeah. That's another area. Next, more questions. How strict is the length restriction in JLS? It's pretty strict. Now, what's going to happen is we get a manuscript of 18,000 words. Mi-Young Park, who is the editorial assistant, will send it back to you and say, can you shorten this and get it to around 15,000 words? Then it gets sent out, and the reviewers will say, you missed this, please add this, do this. And then all of a sudden it balloons again, and it gets to, again, 18,000 words. You should be able to say everything you want about the topic within 15,000 words. So we're going to ask you to try to cut it back, Now, if it gets to, after this 3rd round, 16,000 words, that's fine, right? We know that you've tried your best to get it down. You've added all the important pieces, cut out some superfluous stuff, and it's sitting at 16,000 words. We'll publish that.
Yeah, I would just add to that usually, when we go into different revisions and the paper is too long, it actually often is more a question of, not being economical with the writing. So things are being said, maybe repeated too much, said in a not very, very clear way. So often it's just a question of cleaning up the writing a lot that will squeeze things down. But in any event, as Susan said, if something is really, thousands of words over the limit, then we normally would not publish that. And certainly on the 1st round, it shouldn't be like that. Of course, if we do have to extend it a little bit, then we will do that. But another option for that, and a lot of journals are doing this, if you really feel that people should have access to certain information that you're not able to provide, is to then provide that information online. So we can do that as an online supplement when the article is published. So this is just for details that are not essential to understanding the findings, but would be useful to the readership. So we've had a few articles that have done that. So that's another option. You can always ask and discuss and see what will be the best way forward if you are not sure how to handle the revision when it's asking you for more stuff, but at the same time it's already too long. We can try to give you some advice on that. So I don't know, Susan, if you wanted to come back to that, or
nope.
There's something.
Well, I think we are coming to just about the end. We have 2 more minutes. We can certainly stay on longer, but it looks like the discussion or questions in the chat are completed. If you have any other questions that you think about this afternoon, oh, I forgot to ask this question, please go ahead and send either Jan or I or both of us an email, and we will try to respond to that as soon as we can.
Right.
So I just want to say thank you so much for coming out to the webinar. I hope it's been very helpful, and we hope to see all your manuscripts come in very soon,
Yes.
or maybe in a year. And we hope, and then all of those of you who've been on here, please just come and say hi when we see you somewhere, and let us know that you were on the webinar. So thank you so much, and we hope you have a good night or a good day.
Wherever you are. Okay. Thank you, everyone, and we'll talk to you again. Bye-bye.